The murderer. The defendant was represented by a very young lawyer, for whom this was his first court appearance. He delivered the following speech. The facts are undeniable, gentlemen of the jury. My client, an honest man, a bank clerk with an impeccable reputation, quiet and timid, killed his employer in a fit of rage that, at first glance, seems inexplicable. Allow me, so to speak, to lay bare the psychology of this crime, without softening anything and without offering justifications. Then, you will deliver your verdict. Jean-Nicolas Luger is the son of highly respectable parents. They raised him to be modest and instilled in him a belief in honor. And his entire crime, gentlemen, lies precisely in this belief in honor. This feeling is almost forgotten in our time. It has lost its power, retaining only its name. Only in a few families, simple and conservative, does this severe tradition still survive. This reverence for a person or a thing, for a feeling or a faith that becomes a sacred shrine, a faith that tolerates neither doubt, nor mockery, nor the shadow of suspicion. A truly honest man, in the full sense of the word, can only be one who believes in honor. His eyes are closed. He believes. But we, who live with our eyes wide open, we habitués of the palace of justice, this cesspool of society where all its filth settles. We, the confidants of every shameful secret, the ardent defenders of every vile act of which man is capable. We, the patrons of all scoundrels, male and female, from princes to vagabonds, almost living at their expense. We, who are ready to defend any criminal before you with indulgence, a benevolent smile. We, whose sympathy for the accused, if one truly loves one's profession, grows stronger the more terrible the crime. We no longer believe in honor. We see too closely the torrent of universal corruption that engulfs everyone, from those in power to the lowliest beggars. We know all too well how everything happens, how everything is bought and sold. Positions, titles, honors, sometimes openly for a handful of gold, sometimes more subtly for a title, for a share of profits, or simply for a woman's kiss. Our duty, our profession, obliges us to know everything, to suspect everyone, for every person inspires suspicion. That is why we are astounded when we encounter a man like this murderer before you, whose faith in honor is so powerful that he himself has become its victim. We, gentlemen, care for our honor as we care for cleanliness. Out of a distaste for baseness, from a sense of personal dignity and pride, but in the depths of our souls, we do not possess that blind, innate, unshakable faith in honor that this man has. Allow me, then, to tell you about his life. He was brought up as children were raised in the old days, by dividing all human actions into good and bad. Good was shown to him with such irrefutable conviction that he learned to distinguish it from evil as clearly as day from night. Nor did his father belong to those free thinkers who, viewing everything from on high, see the origins of beliefs and maintain that the distinction between good and evil was born of social necessity. And so he grew up, devout and trusting, enthusiastic and narrow-minded. At 22, he married. His wife was a cousin, raised in the same manner as he, just as guileless, just as pure. He was granted the priceless fortune of having as his life's companion an honest and straightforward woman, something so rare in this world and worthy of all respect. For his mother, he felt that reverence with which mothers are regarded in patriarchal families, that religious sentiment with which one worships a deity. He transferred a portion of this reverence to his wife, softened by marital intimacy, and he lived in complete ignorance of deceit, in an atmosphere of unshakable sincerity and serene happiness, unlike others. He himself deceived no one and did not even entertain the thought that he could be deceived. Shortly before his marriage, he had taken a position as a cashier with Monsieur Langley, whom he recently killed. We know, gentlemen of the jury, from the testimony of Madame Langley and her brother, Monsieur Purchus, her husband's partner, from the testimony of family members and all the senior staff of the bank, that Luger was a model employee, respectful to his employer, a paragon of honesty, diligence, precision, and meekness. Everyone respected him, as he deserved for his impeccable conduct. He grew accustomed to this respect and to the adoration with which his wife was surrounded, unanimously praised by all. She died of typhoid fever. In a matter of days, she was gone. His grief was, without a doubt, profound, but it was the gloomy, restrained sorrow of a pedant. Only his pallor and gaunt features betrayed his suffering. Then, gentlemen, something quite natural occurred. This man had been married for 10 years. For 10 years he had felt a woman beside him. He had grown used to her care, to the familiar voice that greeted him each time, to the evening farewell and the morning greeting, to the soft rustle of her dress, so dear to his heart, to the affection, now amorous, now maternal, that sweetens life, to the presence of a beloved woman, which makes the hours pass more quickly. He had grown accustomed, perhaps, to being indulged, to being well fed, accustomed to the tender guardianship that one doesn't notice, but which gradually becomes a necessity. He could no longer live in solitude. To while away the long evenings, he began to stop for an hour or two at a neighboring beer hall. After drinking a mug, he would sit motionless for a long time, absently watching the billiard balls chasing one another through clouds of tobacco smoke, mechanically listening to the players' squabbles, his neighbors' arguments about politics, and the bursts of laughter occasionally provoked by a crude joke from the other end of the hall. At times, he would fall asleep from weariness and boredom, but with every fiber of his soul, he felt an irresistible need for a woman's soul, for a woman's body, and every evening he would unconsciously sit closer and closer to the counter behind which the little blonde cashier presided. He was irresistibly drawn to her, for she was a woman. Soon they became acquainted, and he grew accustomed. It was so pleasant to spending his evenings near her. She was sweet and attentive, as is expected in such establishments where one must smile at the patrons. She was amused that he ordered mug after mug. Besides, it increased the takings. With each passing day, Luger became more attached to this woman, although he did not know her at all, although her life remained a mystery to him. He fell in love with her merely because he had met no other. The little cashier proved to be cunning, and, soon realizing that this simpleton could be taken advantage of, began to devise how best to get him under her thumb. The cleverest course, of course, was to make him marry her, and this she managed without much difficulty. Need I tell you, gentlemen of the jury, that this person's conduct proved most unbecoming, and that marriage, far from restraining her, on the contrary made her even more brazen. By virtue of an innate female cunning, it gave her pleasure to deceive this honest man with all the clerks in the office. I assert, with all of them, we have the letters, gentlemen. It soon became a byword. Only the husband, as is customary, remained in ignorance. Finally, this vile woman, driven by easily understood self-interest, managed to seduce even the owner's son, a 19-year-old youth, and soon acquired a pernicious influence over his soul and feelings. Monsieur Langley, who until now, out of the kindness of his heart and his friendly disposition towards his subordinate, had turned a blind eye to everything, had every reason to be outraged when he saw his son in the hands, or rather, in the embrace of this dangerous person. He made the mistake of summoning Luger immediately to tell him everything in an outburst of fatherly indignation. It remains for me, gentlemen, to read you the account of the crime, recorded by the investigating magistrate from the words of the dying man. I had just learned that the day before my son had given this woman 10,000 francs, and anger overpowered my reason. Of course, I never doubted Luger's honesty, but sometimes blindness is more dangerous than vice. And so, I called him in and announced that I was forced to dismiss him. He stood before me, shocked, understanding nothing. Then, in a rather sharp tone, he asked for an explanation. I refused to give one, remarking that the reasons for the dismissal were of an intimate nature. Then it occurred to him that I suspected him of dishonesty, and, turning terribly pale, he began to plead, to insist, that I explain the matter to him. He grew heated and allowed himself to raise his voice. As I remained silent, he began to curse, to insult me, and worked himself into such a frenzy that I began to fear violence. After a particularly offensive word, which wounded me to the core, I threw the whole truth in his face. For a few seconds he stood motionless, looking at me in confusion. Then, snatching from my desk the long shears I use for trimming the margins of business papers, he rushed at me, raised his hand, and I felt something pierce my throat, though I felt no pain. There, gentlemen of the jury, is the simple account of this murder. What more is there to say in the defendant's defense? Having had every reason to respect his first wife, he respected the second just as blindly. After a brief deliberation, the accused was acquitted.